Hello and welcome to another video. Today we're going to make a dish called pasta alla matriciana. This is perhaps the easiest pasta dish I've ever made. It's also a really great example of traditional cooking from the city of Rome. Now, this dish, like carbonara, is traditionally made with guanciale, which is cured pig cheek. But most of the time that's harder to get, and so most of the time people will make it with something called pancetta, which is kind of like bacon, but it's not. It's not smoked, it's usually herb cured and things like that, but it is from the pork belly. Both the cheek and the belly are very fatty portions of meat, and basically here the guanciale or the pancetta forms the fatty base for the dish. So this dish is super easy to make. I can't stress that enough. This is probably the best example I can think of beginning or beginner level Italian cuisine. So let's go ahead and go over ingredients and then we'll get started. And now for ingredients. We have olive oil, which is the primary cooking oil in the area around Rome. Most of central to southern Italy uses cooking, basically olive oil as their primary cooking oil, typically what you would use when you start cooking a dish. Up in the north, it's usually butter. In a few places it's lard, but around Rome, olive oil is the predominant cooking fat. So of course we'll start with that. The next major fat that we will add is this pancetta here. I have 150 grams of pancetta, and this is mostly fat. But not all pancetta is mostly fat. Some will be a little more meaty than others. But again, the primary purpose of this is to add more fat to the dish, make the sauce a bit richer. We're going to use spaghettoni, which is sort of a thick spaghetti. You can also use bucatini, which is another different pasta that is found in Roman cuisine quite a bit. We will use some white wine, 1 to 2 small red chili peppers, depending on spiciness, and 2 small cans or 1 larger can of stewed whole tomatoes. We may add a little bit of salt, and we will top it with a little bit of grated pecorino romano cheese. This is a sheep cheese, typically used as a condiment around Roman cooking. So let's go ahead and get started. Of course, as you get started, always nicely salt your water for the pasta. And since we're not using any of this pasta water for anything, you can go ahead and add some extra salt. Really important for the flavor. Going ahead and putting this on, make it warm. I'm going to start cutting the pancetta, and then we'll go from there. Cutting the pancetta is relatively easy. What I typically do is I will cut it 1 centimeter one direction and maybe ½ a centimeter per piece the other direction to form something kind of like a lardon. So just to give you an idea of what it will look like at the end, maybe something like this. And I'm going to do that to this whole piece of pancetta here. And when I come back, this will be done, and we'll be ready to start cooking our sauce. Now, the one thing I do that's relatively non-traditional is I use a wok. But what we're going to do is we're going to add some olive oil to the bottom of the wok, and we're going to turn this on to heat. The reason why I use a wok is because, especially when we start tossing the sauce, the pasta in the sauce, woks are just really nice and practical for that. So my recommendation, use a wok for this dish. You've already seen me use one for carbonara. As soon as this starts to get warm, which it will in a moment, I will add my cut pancetta, and we'll start rendering this. Now, with a wok, I find I usually have to turn the heat up a bit just because of the shape of the pan and the contact that it makes with the stove. So, but if I was using a frying pan, I'd probably keep this on maybe medium. So I'm starting it off on high, and I'm going to turn it down to medium once it starts to get warm. So now it's been like another minute or so. The pan is starting to get warm. I'm going to add the pancetta, and I'm using 2 chilies today. These particular chilies I haven't found to be that spicy. You should use just enough chili to give it a little bit of warmth in your mouth. It shouldn't be spicy, but it should just kind of warm your mouth as you eat it. Now we're going to go ahead and start to render the fat here. And as this starts to go, then we'll go on to the next step, which the next step will be the wine, and then finally the tomatoes. Now you can start to hear the pancetta starting to cook a little bit. So I'm going to start to stir this a little bit to help break up any clumps. And as this starts to heat, the stirring will break these up a little more, but I don't really want to crush the chilies. Also, normally I'd use perfectly fresh chilies, but I ended up freezing these, so I don't want to put them under too much pressure and have them break up and change the dish a lot. This might be a little big. Let me cut this. No, it is in smaller pieces. There we go. So I'll come back once this is nicely rendering, and we'll go from there. So at this stage you can see that the fat is becoming translucent, and I'm going to let this continue to render kind of over a medium to medium. Well, it would be a medium heat if it weren't for a wok, but I'm going to turn the heat up a little bit. Once this just starts to brown a little bit, then I'm going to add about half a cup or so, about 125 mils or so of white wine, and then we'll boil these in the white wine until it boils all the way dry. So now we can see that some of the fat's starting to yellow a little bit. Things are starting to brown just a tiny bit. All of the fat is nicely translucent, so it's time to start the boiling process. Now, my understanding is that boiling the fat like this helps extract more oil for the dish. So again, I'm going to add about 125 mils or so. Doesn't have to be precise. You can add more or less. Totally up to you. And I'm going to turn the heat all the way up, and we're going to boil this until it boils all the way dry. So this will take about another 10-15 minutes, and then I'll be back. Well, we're not done yet. I wanted to show you one thing here, and that's that during this boiling process, this liquid becomes very translucent. It loses its transparency. And the way you can tell that this is nicely boiled dry is that it becomes relatively transparent again. But I wanted to show you the intermediate stage so that you could spot it when you're making it yourself. So this is definitely sort of a wine oil emulsion, and it will get pretty clear as it boils dry. So now you can see the oil has become clear again, and that means that this is all boiled dry. Now, we can let this cook for a little longer if you like, and just kind of let the fats render down a little bit, add a little more fat to the sauce, and add make these pieces a little bit thicker or perhaps a little bit more flavorful. But we don't have to do that at this point. We can decide one way or the other. I am going to let this go for another minute or so, and then I will take out the pancetta, and I will leave the chilies in here. So yeah, you can see that there's a lot more fat that's come out in that process. So I believe that that's part of it, and then also the alcohol will help move flavors around. So we're going to give this just another minute or so, and then I will take the pancetta out and we'll go ahead and get started on the tomatoes. Alright, I don't think I want to let this go any further, so I'm going to pull these out, and you can use a slotted spoon or your handy spatula, doesn't really matter. At this point I've also turned the heat down to about medium, again, just to make sure that I don't like overcook the oils or anything like that. Now the pancetta will be added back near the end of the dish. Alright, here we are. So, at this point, I'm also going to add my pasta to the water. Now, I'm cooking for 4 people today, so I'm using half a kilogram of pasta. Now, we're just going to open our cans. And usually what I'll do is I will just pour it over my hand. Keep in mind, you need to be a little careful because it'll start shattering. And then we will just tear apart the tomatoes with our hands. And if a few of them get in, unfortunately, that will happen. You probably don't want to touch the tomatoes once they're in there, so just use your handy spatula, stir this around, do the same thing for the other tomatoes can, and then we're going to stir this in until everything is nicely integrated, except the chili peppers, because we're going to pull the chili peppers out at the end. And so I'm actually not going to pour the whole can over my hands. This time I'm just going to do this. So basically normally I just kind of tear it apart with my hands, because you want nice uneven pieces. And it's worth noting here that tomato juice is an emulsifier. So what's going to happen as we get everything in is that the fat will be absorbed by the tomatoes. So at this point you can see it didn't take very much stirring at all to get the fat and the tomatoes mixed together. As this heats up, the starch in the tomatoes will help to thicken this broth or this sauce quite a bit, and in about 10 minutes we'll be ready to add our pasta. So I'm going to turn the heat back up until this starts to boil, and then I'll turn it back down. Also, at this point I like to lightly salt the sauce. Keep in mind the pancetta and the Romano cheese will add more salt, so don't overdo it. It's always easier to add more salt than take salt out, and definitely keep that in mind. So we're going to go ahead and let this cook while our noodles is getting done. When the noodles are done, I don't think the sauce will be quite ready, so we'll let it set aside for a moment. Alright, so it's been about 10 minutes, so I'm going to finish off the sauce. I'm going to take the chili peppers out and discard them. And I'm going to take the noodles and I'm going to dump them into the sauce and stir them around. Sort of like this is why I really like to do this in a wok. This just makes things real easy. And might make a little bit of a mess, but it's easy enough to clean up. And one note here is that the noodles will continue to cook after you take them off the heat. So it's actually kind of good if you have the noodles be very, very, very slightly on the underdone side. I prefer to do it just when they just barely lost their crunch and they're still like quite chewy. And here we have this. Now, I could toss this with the pancetta now, or I could do what I prefer to do and just top it with the pancetta when I'm done. When I'm done serving. So I'm going to just clean up the backsplash, and then I'll be right back to serve. So the first thing is take about a nice sized portion of noodles, and I always serve them with tongs. The nice thing about tongs is you can very nicely spiral things around on the plate and make everything look nice. So if we just do this, we can sort of come up with sort of a nice spiral. And then we're going to take some part of the pancetta and just top it over the top. And then from here, I will grate a bit of Romano cheese over the top. And then I'll pair it with a few pieces of ciabatta and some veggies of some sort. But I'm not going to worry about showing that on this video. I'm just going to grate it and then we'll do the taste test. So this time I'm going to use this fine shredder side on this box grater, and I'm just going to grate a little bit over the top. There we go. And here we have our pasta alla matriciana. And now for the taste test. I'm going to take a bite here with the pancetta and everything. This is just wonderful. It's not overdone. It's all the flavors just kind of come together. There's that little tiny bit of spiciness, but not really enough to, be fiery or anything. It's just a hint. There is the tomatoes, the pancetta, the cheese. All this comes together into a really, really, really wonderful dish. Now, if you like this content and you find it useful, I hope I have earned a subscription from you. Please subscribe and click the bell so you'll see more of my videos. If you have any questions or thoughts or constructive criticism, love to hear about those in the comments. And I look at a number of things when I decide what kinds of videos to produce more of. These include what videos people have subscribed from, how many views, how many comments, and how many likes there are. So you can participate in that process in that way. But beyond that, I just want to say, hope you have a great week. Bon appetit, and see you next week.